At midnight, a frail beggar was thrown into the rain outside a police station, mocked, beaten, and humiliated. But what no one knew was that this beggar was actually the most powerful man in the county. By dawn, their cruelty would be exposed and lives would be shattered forever. It was past midnight. The streets of Manchester deserted, the rain falling in heavy sheets that stung my skin as though the sky itself wished to wash me away. I stood there trembling, not from the cold alone, but from the weight of what I was about to do. My clothes hung from me in tatters, my shoes split open at the seams, the sour stench of neglect clinging to my body. In the reflection of a puddle, I did not see Edward Moore, governor of the county, but a beggar, hollow-eyed and broken. That was precisely what I wanted everyone else to see. For tonight, I was no longer a man of authority. I was the voiceless, the despised, the invisible. For weeks I had received letters handwritten in ink, smudged by tears, a mother begging me to believe her when she said her son had been beaten inside the local precinct for nothing more than seeking shelter. An elderly builder claiming he had been forced to hand over money just to avoid harassment. A child left bruised and terrified for daring to ask for food. I summoned reports, I asked for explanations, and every time the answers were the same. There was no misconduct, nothing unusual, nothing to investigate. Yet I could hear in the trembling words of those letters something that paper and ink could not cover. It was the truth of suffering. And I could no longer sit in my office signing decrees while human dignity was trampled outside my window. So I hatched the plan that kept me awake for nights. To know the truth, I had to descend into it. To test the integrity of those who wore the uniform, I had to become the very kind of man they despised. I learned how to shuffle with bowed shoulders, how to let my hands shake as if begging for bread. I smeared dirt across my face, let the sour smell of onions and sweat soak into my coat, and in my pocket I hid a recorder no larger than a matchbox. I was ready not as Edward Moore, but as the man no one sees. The man everyone avoids. A beggar. When I reached the precinct, the neon sign flickered weakly against the rain. The metal gates loomed ahead, black and unwelcoming. I gripped my dented tin bowl tighter, my fingers stiff with cold. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back. After all, I was governor. I could order investigations, I could sign papers, I could call for inquiries. But what good were inquiries when those who wrote the reports were the very same men accused of cruelty? No, tonight the truth would have to bleed from their own mouths, and I was prepared to suffer every humiliation to draw it out. I knocked softly on the heavy door. Inside, voices rose, laughter, crude and careless. Footsteps approached. The door creaked open and two officers looked out. Their eyes narrowed as the stench hit them. One pulled a face, the other chuckled. "God Almighty, what's this then? Some tramp looking for shelter?" I bowed my head, making my voice tremble. "Please, sir, just a corner to rest. It's cold." Their laughter cut sharper than the rain. "This is a police station, not a bloody hostel. Move along." I tried again, my breath visible in the icy air. "Only for tonight. I'll cause no trouble." The taller one pushed me hard by the shoulder. I staggered back into a puddle, water splashing up into my face. "Didn't you hear me, old man? Get out." In that moment, though my ribs ached and my pride burned, I knew the experiment was working. They did not see a leader, a governor, a man of standing. They saw only filth. And the way they treated me in that disguise would tell me all I needed to know. That night, as the rain slid down my forehead and into my eyes, I whispered to myself a vow. This was only the beginning. By dawn, their true nature would be revealed, and the people who had written to me in despair would finally be heard. If you want to uncover the shocking truth of what happened inside that station, stay with me until the end of this story. And if you are new to the channel, please subscribe and support us so we can continue to bring you stories that matter, stories that reveal what hides in the shadows. Now, I have a small question for you, something to think about as we move forward. If you were in my position, what would you have done? A. Ordered an official investigation from my office. B. Gone undercover myself to experience the truth. Comment A or B below. I want to hear your answer in the comments. The rain had begun to ease when the door to the station slammed open. Out came Inspector Henry Hunt, a towering man with the sort of belly that spoke of long dinners and too much ale, his eyes gleaming with a cruel sense of authority. Behind him followed Deputy Inspector Lewis Quinn, leaner, sharper, with a smirk that curled his lips into a permanent sneer. They did not pause to ask who I was. They saw me a shivering figure in rags, and their disdain was instant. "What's this, then?" Hunt barked, his voice loud enough to echo in the small corridor.
"A tramp, thinking he can crawl in here for charity." He didn't wait for my answer. His boot struck me hard in the ribs, the shock of it forcing the air from my lungs. I doubled over my hands, clenching the filthy floor tiles, but I did not resist. To resist would be to reveal too much. Quinn crouched, his face so close I could smell the stench of tobacco on his breath. He grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head back, so I had no choice but to meet his eyes.
"People like you," he whispered, "should be taught their place." He pushed me down so violently that my forehead scraped the floor. Blood welled just above my eyebrow, but I kept silent. My recorder was running. Every insult, every strike, every cruelty was being captured. They ordered me to my feet and shoved a broom into my hands. "Clean the floors," Hunt said, his tone mocking. "If you want a place to stay, you'll earn it." The broom was broken, its bristles stiff and foul-smelling. I swept clumsily, my body aching, while Quinn kicked over a bucket of water, sending grimy puddles across the tiles. "Don't miss a spot, beggar, and when you're done, the toilets need scrubbing." Their laughter filled the air as if cruelty was their favorite sport. It was then that the true horror of the night unfolded before me. An old man shuffled into the station, his back bent, his breath shallow. He raised a trembling hand. "Please," he murmured, "just a glass of water." Hunt snorted. He reached for a bucket half filled with filthy mop water and hurled it straight into the old man's face. The man stumbled back, coughing and gagging, water dripping from his grey hair. Quinn doubled over, laughing, clapping his hands like a child amused by a cruel joke. I felt my nails dig into the wooden handle of the broom. Rage surged through me, but I forced it down. If I revealed myself too soon, the evidence would vanish with the night. Not long after, a boy no more than 10 years old crept through the doorway. His clothes were thin, his cheeks hollow. He held his small hands out. "Sir, please, I'm hungry." "Do you have anything?" His voice cracked as he spoke. Quinn didn't hesitate. His hand struck the boy's face with a sound that made my heart stop. "Then starve or steal. That's what your kind are good for." The boy stumbled, tears springing to his eyes, and bolted into the rain. His sobs echoed long after he had gone. A little later, a woman arrived holding the hand of her young daughter. The child was feverish, her small body wrapped in a blanket. "Please," the mother begged softly, "just a corner to keep my child warm." "She has been ill." My heart clenched. I wanted nothing more than to reveal myself, to protect them, to drag these officers into the light of justice then and there. But I knew if they entered, they would face the same torment I was enduring. My voice cracked as I forced myself to speak the lie that protected them. "Leave! Don't come in. This is no place for you." The woman's eyes widened, then softened. She seemed to understand. She bowed her head, murmured a faint thank you, and walked back into the rain with her daughter. I watched them disappear, my chest burning with guilt. To shield them, I had to play the part of a cruel gatekeeper. The burden of that lie weighed heavier than any kick or insult I had suffered. Inside, Hunt and Quinn continued their game, making jokes about vermin and scum, tossing me from corner to corner like I was no more than a rag doll. But I endured every humiliation, because in each act of cruelty their true selves revealed themselves. My recorder captured not just their words, but the contempt in their tone, the venom in their laughter, the sound of their boots against broken bodies. That night I realized this was not about a few officers misusing power. It was about a system rotting from within one that had grown arrogant enough to believe it would never be exposed. As I knelt in that filth, my face raw from Quinn's grip and my back sore from Hunt's boot, I thought of my father, an honest man who had once been beaten for daring to protest injustice. His words came back to me as though whispered by the rain. "One day, son, you must stand for those who cannot." And though I looked like a beggar, though I was spat upon and mocked, I knew that I was standing for them now. Each insult was not my shame, it was their confession. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it the reckoning. The hours dragged on until the darkness outside began to pale, and a faint grey light crept through the barred windows of the station. My body was shivering uncontrollably by then, my clothes soaked through my hands, cracked from scrubbing floors and toilets under their jeering eyes. Every muscle in me ached, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. And yet the final test of my endurance came just before dawn, when Inspector Henry Hunt strutted out once more, his boots striking the floor like drums of arrogance. "Well, beggar," he drawled, stretching his words as if savouring them, "you've had quite the night, haven't you? But if you think you can walk out of here so easily, think again." He tilted his head towards Deputy Inspector Lewis Quinn, who was already smirking like a predator, anticipating fresh prey. Hunt pointed to his polished boots, the leather shining despite the grime of the station floor. "On your knees," he ordered. "Show some respect. Lick them clean, and maybe we'll let you go."
A roar of laughter erupted from the officers gathered around. To them it was sport. To me it was the breaking point. I could taste bile rising in my throat as I stared at those boots. For a moment I allowed myself to remain hunched, still playing the part of the beggar. But inside something shifted. A flame that had smouldered through the night roared to life. Enough. Enough of the humiliation, the cruelty, the petty tyrannies of men who believed uniforms made them gods.
Slowly I straightened, my spine cracked as I forced myself upright, wiping the grime from my hands onto my rags. Their laughter faltered, replaced by confusion. No beggar stands tall, not like that. I looked directly into Hunt's eyes. For the first time, I spoke with the full weight of my true self. This charade ends now. They blinked, startled, as the tone of my voice cut through the air like steel. I reached into my coat, my fingers brushing against the small recorder, humming faithfully against my chest, and drew out the worn leather wallet I had concealed all night. Hunt scoffed, but his smirk faltered when I flipped it open. The crest caught the first light of morning, glinting red and gold. My identification card lay within, undeniable in its authority. "I am Edward Moore," I said, my voice clear and sharp, "governor of this county." The silence that followed was absolute. The laughter evaporated, the sneers melted into wide-eyed horror. Quinn's jaw slackened, his smirk collapsing as if it had never existed. Hunt took a step back, his face blanching, his lips fumbling to form words that would not come. The younger officers who had mocked me hours earlier shifted uneasily, their gazes darting between one another like trapped animals. And then, with a hollow clatter, the baton that Hunt had carried slipped from his hand and hit the tiled floor. I let the moment hang, the weight of their recognition pressing down on them. Then I reached once more into my coat and pulled out the tiny device that had been recording since the moment I first stepped into the rain. With a click, the stillness was filled with sound. Hunt's barked insults, Quinn's sneering threats, the laughter as they drenched the old man in dirty water, the crack of a slap across a child's face, the pleading voice of a mother turned away. Each vile moment spilled out into the open, stripped of their secrecy. The very walls of the station seemed to recoil. "You see," I said, holding their gaze one by one, "this is no longer just my word against yours. The truth is here. It has been preserved. Every cruelty, every abuse, every betrayal of the uniform you wear has been captured. My words rang with the kind of authority that no disguise could conceal." Hunt stammered, "Governor, we didn't know." I cut him off. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with decency. You didn't need to know my name to recognize that the old man who begged for water was human. You didn't need to know my title to spare a hungry child your fist." My voice rose sharper now. "You failed not because I am your superior, but because you forgot that those you scorned are your equals in humanity." The color drained from their faces. Quinn's hands twitched as though searching for something to cling to. The younger constables bowed their heads, their bravado shattered. I stepped forward, closing the space between myself and Hunt, and whispered, so only he could hear, "By dawn the world will know what you are." And right on cue, the sound of sirens pierced the quiet morning. Blue and red lights flared through the frosted windows, cutting across the gloom. A convoy of cars pulled up outside the station, their engines thrumming with urgency. Doors slammed, hurried footsteps approached, and the entrance burst open. Senior police officials, flanked by press who had been tipped off in advance, poured into the room. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, pens scratched furiously at notebooks. I turned to face them, still holding the recorder aloft. "Here," I announced, my voice steady and commanding as the truth of what transpired in this station tonight. I pressed the button again, and the sounds of cruelty filled the air, echoing beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Every gasp, every cry, every jeer was laid bare, and there was no corner dark enough to hide in. As the officers around me crumbled under the weight of exposure, I felt no triumph, only a grave certainty. Justice had only begun to stir. What came next would determine whether the night's suffering would bring change or fade into silence. But one thing was already clear: the reckoning was here, and there would be no escape from it. The silence that followed the revelation was heavy, almost suffocating. The officers who had sneered at me through the night now stood pale and trembling, their bravado collapsing like paper before the rain. Inspector Henry Hunt clutched at his belt as though it could hold together the fragments of his authority. Deputy Inspector Lewis Quinn had lost all trace of his cruel smirk. His lips quivered, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. The younger constables bowed their heads in shame, their hands fidgeting with caps and batons, unable to meet my gaze. Behind me, the senior officials moved quickly into position, their voices sharp and clipped. The director of the county police stepped forward, his face tight with disbelief. "Governor Moore," he said, his voice wavering slightly, "what has happened here?" I looked at him, then at the journalists, their cameras flashing in bursts of harsh white light. "The truth," I replied simply, "and it is uglier than any of you wish to believe." I handed the recorder to an aide, ensuring the evidence was secured. "Play it for them," I commanded. And so it began. The insults, the curses, the laughter over suffering, the slap of hand against child's face, the cruel taunts hurled at a desperate mother. The sounds echoed through the hall like a ghostly choir of the damned. Faces blanched, pens stopped mid-sentence. The journalists glanced at one another wide-eyed, knowing they were witnessing a scandal that would shake the county to its core. Hunt fell to his knees first, his voice breaking. "Governor, I beg you."
I have a wife, children. Don't let this end my life." His plea cut through the air, but my patience had been bled dry during the long night. "Did you think of your wife when you kicked an old man to the ground?" I asked, my voice rising with the memory. "Did you think of your children when you mocked a hungry boy until he ran into the rain with tears in his eyes? No, Inspector, you did not. You only thought of your power and your pleasure, and tonight you will answer for it."
Quinn collapsed next his knees, hitting the tile. He tried to stammer excuses, something about stress, about misunderstanding, but his words fell apart in his throat. I silenced him with a raised hand. "There are no misunderstandings in cruelty. You enjoyed what you did." That laughter was not a mistake, it was a revelation. His head dropped, his shoulders slumping as if the truth had finally crushed him. I turned back to the senior officials. "Suspend them immediately," I ordered. "Begin criminal proceedings for assault, abuse of authority, and the violation of basic human dignity. Let them stand before the same justice they mocked." The director nodded stiffly, gesturing to the officers at his side. Handcuffs clicked around Hunt's wrists, then Quinn's. The sound echoed with a strange finality, like the toll of a bell at dawn. But I was not finished. "This is not about two corrupt men," I declared, raising my voice so that the entire hall and the journalists scribbling furiously could hear me. "This is about a culture that allowed them to believe they were untouchable, about a system that told the vulnerable their voices did not matter, about the rot that grows when oversight becomes complacency." My words, sharp with anger, but steadied by conviction, filled the room. I could feel the eyes of every man and woman upon me. I laid out my plan, each measure shaped by the night I had endured. From this day forward, every station in this county will be fitted with cameras operational, at all hours footage preserved for review. Every precinct will install secure complaint boxes with submissions delivered directly to my office. A public hotline will operate day and night so that no plea for help can be silenced by those in power, and I will personally conduct unannounced inspections in any guise at any hour. No one will know when or where I will appear. From now on, accountability will live in every corner of this institution. The words seemed to reverberate against the walls, each sentence striking deeper into the hearts of those listening. Some of the younger officers nodded faintly as though understanding for the first time the true weight of their duty. Journalists jotted down every word, their pens racing to capture history in ink. I looked back at Hunt and Quinn now, shackled and pale, their eyes hollow. "You may have thought your uniforms gave you the right to demean others," I told them, "but your uniforms are supposed to stand for service, not tyranny. Tonight you disgraced them. But you also reminded this county of why reform cannot wait another day." As they were led out under the unrelenting flashes of cameras, I felt no satisfaction, only a heavy solemnity. Justice had taken its first breath, but justice alone would not suffice unless it was bound to reform. I knew what awaited me: resistance from those who benefited from silence, pushback from those who feared exposure. But I also knew the night had ended, and the dawn had broken with truth. Standing in that station, the stink of bleach and tobacco still clinging to the air, I felt the weight of the county pressing on my shoulders. But for the first time in a long while, I also felt something else, a quiet certainty that, however painful this reckoning was, only the beginning of a change that could endure. Months passed, yet the memory of that night never loosened its grip on me. It followed me into every meeting, every corridor of the county hall, every late hour I spent drafting reforms, I could still feel the cold rain that had soaked my skin, the rough shove that nearly sent me sprawling into the gutter, the sound of cruel laughter echoing off the station walls. It was more than memory, it was a responsibility carved into me like stone, and I refused to let it fade. The reforms I had demanded began to take root, though not without resistance. Cameras were installed in stations across the county. At first, some officers grumbled, their pride stung by the watchful lenses. Others resisted, openly claiming it undermined trust. But within weeks, patterns began to shift. Complaints of abuse fell dramatically, not because people were silent, but because behavior was forced into the light. The knowledge of being watched curbed the casual cruelty that had once gone unchecked. The complaint boxes became a lifeline. I remember reading the first letter that reached my desk. It was written in shaky handwriting, words spelled awkwardly, but pulsing with desperation. "Governor, thank you for listening. For the first time, I am not afraid to speak." The writer described harassment from a junior officer, an incident that was now being investigated. It was a small case in the larger storm, but to that person it meant the difference between silence and dignity. I kept that letter folded neatly in my desk drawer as a reminder of why this fight could not be allowed to falter. Then came the hotline. At first the calls flooded in, some trivial, others heart-wrenching. A boy of 12 phoned late one night, his voice trembling, asking if he could report that his brother had been slapped outside a station for begging. We traced the call, we investigated, and this time there were consequences. The family were given aid, the officers disciplined, and the boy was told plainly his voice mattered. The most controversial reform, however, was the one I chose to lead myself, the anonymous inspections. I did not always disguise myself as a beggar. Sometimes I was a weary factory worker, sometimes a homeless veteran, sometimes simply an old man asking for directions. Each time I saw the truth through different eyes. Some stations treated me with decency, offering warmth and water. Others still revealed hints of contempt, though never as brazen as the night of my first test. Word began to spread that the governor could appear at any moment in any form. And with that uncertainty, discipline sharpened, courtesy became habit, and the culture of fear shifted towards a culture of respect. But the reforms were not just about the police. They were about the people. I travelled to villages where once letters of despair had poured in. I sat with mothers, labourers, elderly men and women who had once felt invisible. I listened as they spoke not just of suffering, but of relief that their voices now carried weight. In their eyes I saw something I had not seen in years, trust being rebuilt, brick by fragile brick. I knew the journey was far from over. Corruption does not vanish overnight. Some tried to undermine me, whispering in corridors, plotting in the shadows. But every attempt to weaken the reforms only confirmed their necessity. And with each month that passed, the momentum grew until even neighbouring counties began adopting the same measures. The story of that night spread beyond our borders, retold in newspapers, classrooms, and even training academies. They called it the night of reckoning, but to me it was simply the night when truth was finally forced into the open. One afternoon I returned to the very station where it all began. This time I wore no disguise. The building looked different. Fresh paint, clean floors, new faces behind the desk. A frail old man was seated on a chair, sipping tea that an officer had brought him. Nearby, a child clutched a sandwich offered, not with disdain, but with quiet kindness. The sight was enough to bring a sting of tears to my eyes. Inspector Hunt and Deputy Quinn were gone, stripped of their badges, facing justice for their crimes. Their downfall was not my triumph. It was the necessary price of accountability. But the true victory was in that simple moment, an old man treated with dignity, a child fed without fear. As I stood there, the sun streaming through the windows, I felt the weight of my father's words from long ago. He had once told me that justice was not a crown to be worn, but a burden to be carried. That night in the rain, I had carried it disguised as a beggar. Now I carried it openly, knowing it would remain with me all my days. The night had begun as humiliation, but it ended as a promise that those without power would no longer stand alone, a promise that even the smallest voice could be heard, and a promise to myself that I would never again look away when injustice stood before me. For in the end, it was not the authority of my office that made the difference. It was the choice to step into the rain, to bear the cold, to see the truth with my own eyes. And that is what I hope others will remember, that real change begins not in grand speeches or signed decrees, but in the courage to confront the darkness even when it means walking barefoot into the storm. The story of that night was never simply about a governor disguised as a beggar. It was about what happens when truth is hidden behind reports, when cruelty hides in uniforms, and when power forgets its purpose. By choosing to step out of the comfort of his office and into the cold rain, Edward Moore discovered not just the corruption of a station, but the reality of human suffering that official papers refused to show. He endured humiliation, hunger, and pain to see the world as the powerless lived it. And when the mask was lifted, the reckoning that followed was not revenge, it was reform. Hunt and Quinn faced justice, but more importantly, a system that had long thrived on silence was forced into the light. Cameras, hotlines, complaint boxes, and surprise inspections changed not only behavior, but culture, restoring trust between the people and those sworn to protect them. The lesson from this story is profound: justice cannot be served from a distance. True leadership demands presence, empathy, and the courage to stand where it hurts the most. In our modern lives, this lesson applies far beyond police stations. Whether in our workplaces, communities, or families, we are often faced with the choice to look away or to step forward. Sometimes the only way to change a broken system is to live, even briefly, in the shoes of those it fails. When we choose empathy over indifference, when we choose to confront rather than ignore, we open the door to lasting change. Now let me ask you a question. If you were Edward Moore, what would you have done? Trusted the official reports and remained in your office? B, taken the risk of going undercover to see the truth with your own eyes? Comment A or B below. I'd love to hear your answer. And more importantly, what are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe that one person's courage can truly change a system? Share your opinion in the comments so we can learn from each other. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is the motivation for us to continue bringing meaningful stories like this one. Disclaimer: this video contains fictional content presented in a storytelling style inspired by elements of crime and detective genres. Certain scenes and details may include depictions of violence recreated solely for the purpose of entertainment. They do not represent or reflect real events. Viewers under the age of 16 are strongly advised to watch under parental guidance. This story is entirely a work of fiction created to entertain and to offer an imaginative reflection on social themes. It is not intended to criticize, distort, or insult any individual organization or authority, including law enforcement or state institutions. Any resemblance to actual people, events, or places is purely coincidental and unintended. We kindly ask viewers and relevant authorities to understand the creative spirit of this work. Thank you for your attention and support.